it seems to me like some of the concern is that the mind of a mainstream gamer will explode if there's a variation in price. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that that's putting really low expectations on gamers. And we're making something that is supposed to be very different to mainstream and pull them away from mainstream because it provides them with things that they've never been able to have before. And it feels like we would be shooting ourselves in the foot to say, well, we're just going to make a game that's exactly like everything else. We should be leveraging what the blockchain is good at doing, which is, price balance, market discovery, and having permanence there. So the general premise that the average gamer is just not going to be able to handle it doesn't seem to be very real. And a lot of the people that have put complaints in about it, it seems like their actual concern is maybe not that, because then when you get deeper into it and they talk about how that they would fix it, it doesn't seem like they're doing things to fix that. And instead, it seems like they're trying to fix it for people that are going to buy like huge, masses of items and stuff like that. And I mean, there's no way to protect against that sort of stuff just by making something cost a static amount, because everything that happens inside of the game eventually leads to assets being created that are supposed to have some value, and they're going to fluctuate because of the market anyway, because we don't sell those assets. So none of those things are going to be static. So really we're just, in the end, we're still talking about ratios between the cost of doing things in the game and then the benefit of selling them later on. So I think that it stymies a lot of the creativity and doesn't provide any sort of tangible benefits outside of being able to say the average gamer will get something for a particular price. And I don't see that as being a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I mean, when we spoke about this last night, I went, full degen, and I was like, I mean, I would take it even a step further and say, hey, let's let the landowners literally dictate what that price is, as in like they become the primary sellers of that, and Illuvium DAO doesn't put any contribution into that at all, and then it's truly a free market. And you might get someone who's like, I've I've accumulated all of this fuel, but now I've run into this liquidity crisis in personally and whatever, and so now I've got to dump a whole bunch of fuel on the market, and that drops the price of shards. So then everyone's like, oh my god, I'm going to buy all the shards, but then that increases the price. Like, I love that stuff. That seems amazing to me. We obviously don't want to go that crazy, and that's why we put it in this rail system where
what you're talking about there is the difference between bookmakers, and automatic market makers and market makers. And I would suggest, even though that is super wild west and very interesting, we can be very efficient by doing it through an auto market maker, where it will always reflect market sentiment. And there's other things that we can do. Obviously, like, my biggest concern is making sure that there's a demand for all three of the fuels. And that's probably the only thing that I look at as a difficult thing. But I've spoken to our data analytics team about this over the last week, and there's many things that we can do to get it to be reasonably accurate. The other thing to remember is that people who play Illuvium Zero, where that would become an impact, they do have the ability to convert from something else, and there's just a small penalty that they pay for that, which means that in the end, the difference between two pieces of land is not going to be huge, and it will be something that will be reasonably natural. There'll be a fun element of some of your land is going to be more productive than others because of the makeup of it. And I think that that's a good place to be. to have some variance in it without it being too much, especially on the Illuvium Zero side, because the whole purpose of that game is not just to efficiently build out a city, but also to feel a little bit like an industrial tycoon. You know, like you should have some agency over storing up fuel, which drops supply, makes things a little bit more expensive, and then you sell it to make your money. But if you wait for the wrong moment and everybody else dumps their supply before you might end up being less efficient than them. And that effectively turns staking into a game, which is incredibly fun, right? So from that perspective, we can balance and make the game amazingly fun, even though it is reasonably simple. But on the other side, it does necessitate that there is a fluctuation in the price. I want everyone to understand that even those rails have problems long term in the sense that if the price continually goes one way or another and we don't allow market forces to find an equilibrium, there are issues that can go about. I don't know how much detail we want to go into on this conversation about that, but I feel like the purpose of the rails is to make sure that things don't change too much too early, but then that should be fine considering we'll have a decently large liquidity pool from which to operate. So each individual transaction isn't going to swing it by a whole heap. But in the end, it's almost always better to let an automated market do its thing, because then the price of everything it won't be artificial. It'll be what people's sentiment actually is. And the same thing goes with the alluvials that you capture, the augments that you forge, the armaments that you forge. In the end, the value of those is only going to be worth what other people are willing to pay you for them. So we already have a natural equilibrium finding device for one side of the game. I just don't see there being much point in having it the other side. And in fact, when you've got games out there like EVE Online that had been massively successful because of this very fantasy that they allowed, it almost feels like we're taking away something which is a benefit, rather than like, oh, well, this is a problem, but it's not a big problem. I look at it like this is a huge benefit of the system that people are going to really enjoy doing. And like taking that away is, to me, the part that is the problem.
Yeah, so just to be clear though, we do have the ability to top up the liquidity pool if in the event that it did become drained. So we can, it's not ideal, but we can keep these rails. And I think it's the peace of mind of people knowing that because this is the first time that it's like real money, the fluctuations, the potential of unlimited fluctuation scares people. So
that's fine. That's why I suggested it to begin with. But just to also be very clear to everyone on the call, when we talk about draining a pool, we're not talking about because of a hack. We're talking about by not having market prices be the actual demand of something, there can be a point where the funds go back to the DAO and leave the pool having a lower amount of liquidity in there. And that's just a natural occurrence of going outside of the rails for too long, right? That's just math. It's nothing to do with hacking. It's nothing to do with anyone losing money. All of that money would go back to the DAO. And in fact, on the other side, if it kept on going too far above whatever the rails were over and over again, the consequences of that would be that the ratio that landholders get would be a little bit lower compared to the DAO. So at no point is any of this going to lead to it being unhealthy. But having a natural ability to fluctuate means that, let's say that the perfect price was, I don't know, maybe 30% lower than what we initially put it in, right? Like when we look at all of the demand versus all the supply of fuel that comes out, if it was at 30%, it'll get there and then it'll be very stable for quite a long time, because we're talking about an internal system in our game, right? There would be arbitrageurs making sure that it's at that price all of the time, and the only thing that would lift it back up from there or drop it down from there would be changes in sentiment. And changes in sentiment, whether they be up or down, they're good. That's the point of them, to make sure.
I mean, that's the fun of Illuvium's. Yeah, like it's the exact reason that you guys came up with the converters, because that in itself is arbitrage. If you see all of a sudden, holy shit, there's a massive premium on that type of resource, you're going to convert it over, and if there's a profit opportunity, you know, which brings it closer to peg. So, I mean, to close that off, the ideal is that we balance out the ratios and they're all 33, 33, 33, and we never go anywhere near the rails. But we do have them in place. So the absolute maximum that it could swing is 25%, which again, you know, I think we put it to the audience now to see if there are any concerns there or any questions or whatever. But I don't know, for me, and obviously now you know, from all of us at like core contributor land, we think that this is a even more fun to make it an open market. So yeah.
All right. Well then, yeah. Does anyone have any questions right now regarding this? You can just raise your hand and we can bring you up. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, we got one.
First one, crucial.
Just right click. If you see someone, just right click and you should be able to bring to stage.
There you
go. How's it going, guys?
Hey man, how are you?
Good. It's been a minute. Happy to be here. Obviously, you guys are killing it. Great job. Quick question. I know everyone's going to ask, so I might as well be the first person. I know that we were talking about that there is delays and we're waiting on audit for land sale. Is there any updates in that field?
Oh, sorry. I should have been a little bit more. I should have been a little bit more clear. We'll probably go through each, like there's 4 outstanding questions that we need to go through. So I guess I was specifically talking about if anyone had any questions. Yeah, just to keep the formalities.
Okay, my apologies. I thought we were, my bad.
How do you feel about having some swing?
No, I'm all for open markets. I mean, background wise, I came from CSGO trading and Rocket League trading, and for obviously Fortnite bought Rocket League. I think open markets provide opportunity, and that's kind of what crypto's about. It's executing an opportunity and creating strategies. So, you know, I don't think that people need to really concern themselves too much with that front of the game.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Crucial. Anyone else on this subject?
Yeah, specifically on balancing and the pricing inside of the main game, or anything to do with the balancing of those things in Illuvium 0.
Garfoodle.
So the way that it's designed to work is, you can think of it as 1 to 19, but technically it won't happen so immediately, at least to begin with, just to make sure that there's some efficiency in there. Over time, it'll probably be something where when you do that transaction, it'll get to be a shorter and shorter time frame. But yes, that is the way that it gets triggered. And the reason why we've set it up to be that way is so that the land owners are the ones that have agency over the pricing. Now, there's 10,000 plots of land. I don't believe that there's any way for one person to collude on all of that. But technically, if there was one person who was worth, $50 billion or whatever that wanted to raise it, they technically could. However, if it raised past a certain price that we have set with the rails, at that point, anytime the fuel price goes higher than that, we then supply it without them. So there would be a point where there's a penalty for them. And long term, we'll get to some sort of like a stable point at which I would say we don't really need rails after that, because there'd never need to be the DAO putting in some sort of a supply of fuel to, I guess, suppress the price, if that makes sense, because all of the landholders would be the ones executing on that. And if it did get to the point where one person was, the massive tycoon that held all of it back, number one, they only have a certain amount of storage containers, which means that they can't hold it back forever. And number two, we still at any point do have agency to put in fuel to drop the prices. The point is, we don't want to have to execute on that if we feel like things are operating inside of a fun range. Because remember, if the supply dries up and the price still goes up, that means that there's still people using a lot of demand and buying a lot of that fuel. So it really only works for a very small amount of time. And those little micro adjustments in the value are something that we find to be the most interesting part about playing that game. Yeah, but the DAO wouldn't step in until it got above some range. And then long term, let's say we did remove the rails because, we've been operating for a significant period of time between the rails and no real issue inside of that range, then we would probably leave it, or at least that's my opinion on it, is that we would leave it if people stopped selling it a bit. But at some point, if it became like exceedingly expensive, or if it spiked really quickly because some hostile takeover of all of the land had happened, then we would just supply back onto the market to drop it down, at which point that person who's just spent billions of dollars buying all of the lands has shot himself or herself in the foot because they held back their fuel and then we dumped onto the market before them. So I don't think that there's going to be a huge amount of people that are willing to play that incredibly risky gamble, knowing that there is still an eDAO that is capable of executing it on making that strategy look a little bit silly. That's correct. Yeah. So it's designed to be, because it's a pool that is ETH versus those fuels, that it would be in a ratio to ETH versus those fuels. But if it turned out that ETH went to some crazy price, I think people would probably be fine with it getting higher, because obviously anyone who's got that ETH is becoming more and more wealthy while they do it. But there'd be nothing that would stop us adding an oracle to change that. But just remember that if the price of ETH went up very high, the fuels would probably drop in ratio just naturally, because it would cost a lot more money for someone to buy that ETH. So overall, it's a naturally balancing system.
Perfect. Thanks, Garfoodle.
Do we see any more hands?
Nope. We can move on to the next topic, I think.
Okay.
It was based. You got something there?
Looks
Wait.
like we've got one
Scott?
request from Scott.
Hi guys, thank you for explaining this. I did a quick AMN last night to explain this spinning thing to the Chinese community. No question with that. And everyone very supportive. And this is very smart system that I think providing the stability and still very fun. But I want to ask about the ETH that go against this transaction. Where does those ETH come from? Is it from a DAO, from a for funding, and how big would that amount of ETH that is going to be prepared for?
To supply initially?
Yes. No.
initial-
Say if the market price of the fuel goes under or at the negative 25, we're going to use is to buy back the fuel. Where does
No.
the
So that is not required. The way that it works is if the price of fuel drops in relation to ETH, we burn fuel from the pool, and that puts the price up. And if it goes above the price, we supply an extra amount of fuel to the pool. So at no point do we need to supply extra ETH into the system beyond the initial liquidity pool that we provide. And maybe at some point after the game becomes twice as big, we might look at adding more liquidity to that pool, which then stabilizes the prices even further. So, I mean, there's nothing in any IIP to suggest that we absolutely do that. But if we wanted to keep the price more and more stable, the easiest way to do that would be just to effectively be our own liquidity provider and put more in to make it more stable. But at no point inside of the Rails system do we need to add any extra. We just supply or burn, very similar to the way that it works inside of a balancer pool already, which we're already intimately familiar with. So there's no extra cost associated with that.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. I totally understand now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. All right. Looks like we got another one.
One more. I think this might be our last one because we've got 4 things to cover. So
Yeah.
Hey guys, just a quick one. Very keen to know if you guys have made any economic simulations with regards to the expected fuel demand from the overworld versus the production rate from Illuvium 0.
do you want to take that, Kieran, or me?
Yeah, you can.
Yep. Yeah. So we've hired an analyst. We actually have a data analytics team that comprises 3 people at the moment that do most of these simulations. We hired someone as a consultant to do the initial demand calculations, but that was quite a while ago. We did reach out to someone just recently who did another analysis of the whole protocol to work out exactly what they felt the demand for differing things was going to be. And it largely lined up with our expectations. But to be honest, we have an open job for an economist to come on full time to work on these things long term, because as we build more and more titles, it's going to change the dynamics of how things work. We've tried to design the game from the ground up to be very, very simple to understand, with the paradigm of fuel only ever coming from Illuvium 0 and the main assets being the alluvials only ever coming from the overworld, and all the other games effectively acting as sinks where you put money in to play them and to do actions. So from that perspective, it's fairly easy. And if we do allow the ability for the game to be sort of automatically managed in terms of finding the balance price, it should be fine. We don't have any deflationary aspects of the game. There's yield farming, but that obviously is finite. There's a fixed amount of those tokens that is largely known. Outside of that, the only things in the game that might be considered deflationary would be things like armaments and augments and stuff like that. And those are a little bit more ancillary to the main purpose of the game, which is the alluvials, which are not deflationary because those ones must be fused. So however many are caught, the number of a particular type is by necessity going to go down over time after its particular set has been concluded. So overall, the game itself is largely meant to run by itself. It's a DeFi protocol, so it shouldn't require people constantly going in and propping things up and things like that. But we do have an open position for a micro economist to come on board long term to build out far better systems that we can track over time. But until then, our data analytics team are doing quite a good job. Both of our data analytics team have degrees in economics as well. It's just that they're mostly being used for things like the AI for the game and for analytics of the staking platform to make sure that things are running smoothly there.
There's also been a ton of variables that we haven't actually set yet. So it's one of the things that we kind of got to do after we've put into place all of the different prices in game for fuel, for
Once playtesting determines demand, we'll be able to work out roughly the best price to go. And if we're off by 20% or 30%, then that'll be fine. It'll find some sort of a natural equilibrium. So I don't think either of us are particularly concerned.
But that's the beautiful thing about having it as an open market. If we just set an arbitrary price for shards and travel fees and whatever, then we might get it wrong. If we let the market decide it based on the external market forces, then we're going to find the true price of what a shard should be based on how much people are willing to pay for the alluvial that's inside that shard.
Thanks. So, a couple of comments on that. I think the automatic market maker is definitely a good, maybe an initial mechanism to make sure the price doesn't run off. But I just wanted to point out that typically in the crypto games, first couple months, first maybe 4 or 6 months, there's always a hype. So there's always a behavior when the demand for a particular resource is really high, but then after that, it drastically goes down. So whilst this is crypto, it's very volatile in the open market. I mean, depending on how we look at it, I think to some extent there should be a mechanism where gamers or players who is in it really for fun to play the game, to enjoy the game, is kind of shielded from that kind of from those kind of aspects. And I think that's where you were saying that would have what you would have expected is that the issue would have been from the landowners versus the gamers, because it's minuscule compared in comparison. But yeah, just generally saying that if whatever those economic simulations that have been made, if proper stress testing scenarios have been done, that would be really great, especially the first few months. I think that would be the most critical part. Yep.
So one thing that we have is like the backstop to everything when it comes to what if things get overinflated? What if there's 80 billion of a single asset on the marketplace? Blah blah blah. That's why we have a finite amount of time that each one of these alluvials exists. So once that set one finishes, there's a whole nother set. So regardless of what happens, and once that cutoff once that line in the sand is drawn, the only thing that can change the balance of those assets is the fusing mechanic. So it's only going to get less and less and less in terms of the overall supply of a particular NFT or asset.
And the other thing to remember, though, is that with almost every game that has existed in the crypto space, this is not meant to be like a burn on many of the other projects, but almost to a single one, the purpose of them is to get in early, get something, flip it, and make money, right? Like that's the primary goal, is just to get in there and flip and make as much as money as possible and then dump it out. The purpose of our game goes well beyond that, considering that we've got many titles that we're looking to build. Many people are going to want to collect these things because they want to collect them. There's going to be people that want to learn how to play the game at a high level, talking about Arena. because we'll be running tournaments that'll have very large prize pools. So there'll be a huge group of players that are constantly trying to improve their deck, and nothing in that has like a profit motive, except that they want to win and win big so that they can earn effectively, prize money. So if we make a game like Arena to be like properly fun, properly enjoyable to collect, and then make another game and another game and another game that all have that in mind, rather than having the mindset of let's see how quickly people can pump it and then dump it onto someone else, then a lot of that deflation aspect goes away. I'm not saying that we don't get the upside initially, because there might be hype and there might be a bunch of people trying to get in there, but it will be smoothed out far more just purely on the back of people wanting to keep these things long term, because you can't collect all alluvials quickly. If you play the game, it'll be absolutely impossible to get everything. I don't think it'd be even doable inside of a year. And if you tried to buy everything with ETH or with SRV2, it's going to cost a lot to do that, right? So people are going to build out collections, and we're treating this much more like a card collecting game. It's just that imagine if you could play something like Hearthstone or Pokemon the card game, and then with those cards you flip a switch and now those cards can be used in a real-time strategy game that has totally different mechanics and is more your style of game. There's so many different variations that we want to create, which means that people have demand to actually keep their stuff, and that's something that doesn't exist, to my knowledge, in many of the games that are out there at the moment that have that pump and dump sort of lifestyle. Kieran, what's the next?
Cool. Yeah.
deal.
So
Yeah.
that's that's actually a good point. We can go into the next one. So essentially, why the delay? Why are the prices so high for the plots now? This is actually kind of a funny one from my perspective, at least, because originally when we put out the pricing, the community, or the overall sentiment from the community, seemed to be, hey, this is way too cheap. It's just going to be bought out immediately. There's the benefits of the Dutch auction won't even be allowed to be seen because it's just way, way, way too cheap. So we took on that feedback, and included in that was the fact that at that time, I think it was like something like 75% of the sale could have been bought using SRV at that stage, now SRV2. And so people were concerned that if in the event that everyone decided to use their SRV, we would have received a very small amount of actual ETH generated from the sale, and therefore that would mean less revenue distribution. Now, I just want to make it abundantly clear, and I've said this in chat before, we as the team, the core contributors, do not care what currency you use to purchase the land or Illuvatars or whatever. And the reason is because there's a finite amount of SRV2. And so if you don't use it on land, you're going to use it in the game. And then when you're playing the game and you're having fun and you run out of SRV2 because you used it all in the land sale and you only had one single one left, then you're going to start using ETH. And so we're going to make it later. So for us, the revenue generation is going to happen either right now and we distribute that to people, or slower over time through in-game purchases. So from our perspective, the reason that the prices increased was based on community feedback. Now, what I would say with the way that we've set up the sale, the mechanism, is that if you don't use it on land, you're going to use it in the game. And then when you're playing the game and you're having fun and you run out of SRV2 because you used it all in the land sale and you only had one single one left, then you're going to start using ETH. And so for us, the reason that the prices increased was based on community feedback. Now, what I would say with the way that we've set up the sale, the mechanism, it doesn't matter what price we start these things at. Like, that shouldn't be the focus. The focus should be how aggressive is the decay curve that we put on the Dutch auction, and what will be the price when they go off sale, or if they don't sell, what price will that be? And from my perspective, I think it's pretty reasonable when you look at what the pricing is on these tier 1, 2, 3, and 4s at 4.79% of what the starting price is. You know, I honestly think that it's quite reasonable. But at the same time, again, this is a total community decision. Like, we do not care as long as we don't put it too cheap. That would be terrible, and that's the exact thing that happened in the balancer sale. If you remember, we had it priced at $100. Delphi came in and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You're going to scare people off." We said, "I mean, to be honest, this is how a Dutch auction should work." And they said, "Yeah, we get that, but other people don't get that." And you know, balancer auctions at this stage were quite new, and we said, "Okay, we will, you know, go with what you're saying," and we reduced it down to $50. And people then thought, "Oh my God, now it's half the price." Tons and tons and tons of people FOMO'd in. The price jumped up to $140, only to settle around the median price of around $50 at the end of the sale. We don't want that to happen again. And I think the pricing where it's at now is reflective of that not happening. But again, it doesn't really matter to us. Like, this is completely up to the community.
Yeah, there was also some people accusing us of pumping up the prices so that we could recover money from the hack and whatnot. And beyond that being utterly ridiculous, the price doesn't matter, right? Like, we've adjusted the curve to go down faster, which puts it's just above double what it was before. People were asking for it to be put up about triple. In the end, it's just a matter of, are the plots going to sell in the first 15 minutes or in the first 30 minutes? As far as we're concerned, if they don't sell in the first minute or in the last minute, it has been successful and it'll find its market price, and everyone will be able to get a piece of land that they're happy with and that they paid the exact amount that they were willing to spend on.
Yeah, and to be fair, again, no one knows what the true market price of land should be. If it wouldn't matter what price we put on these plots, these tiers, it's not going to be as accurate as finding out the true market price through a mechanism like, which, you know, that's why I don't really understand the complaints, but yeah. I think we can open that one up to
Yeah. Let's see if
community.
Anybody got any questions. Just click the request button and we'll bring you up. No.
Seems like
No.
there's none.
Okay, so we should be totally clear on that one then. Next one is just regarding delays.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was to do with the audit. So, which effectively was pushed back due to the hack. We had to do a whole bunch of upgrades to that SLV2 contract, and we were forced to, because SLV2 can be used in the land sale, we were forced to wait until that was audited. As you know, we've been going as fast as we can with getting the Illuvidex up and whatever. As soon as they finished that audit, we sent them the land sale. The unfortunate thing here is that we have been pushing QuantStamp and now PeckShield and Certic were really, really pushing them to say, here's another product, here's another product, here's another product. And so it's not even just the fact that audits are very, very hard to get in the space due to the high demand. It's that we have our own high demand on top of that. And so like QuantStamp has not stopped auditing our stuff for pretty much, it almost feels like the entire time. So the reality is, unfortunately, after that hack, we decided that we would go next level on security. And I know people in the community are making jokes and whatever, like, how many audits do you want to go and get, like, and whatever. But to be frank, we just transferred over $500,000 personally to cover the last hack. We don't want to do that again. There was another example of a game, a network that had a very, very, very large scale attack on it, and they lost a lot of money, right? Security is paramount. If that happens to us in 6 months' time or 12 months' time when the game is running, it's going to be catastrophic. And no one will be sitting there going, oh, well, at least we got those 2 extra weeks of playtime. It's just going to be, fuck Illuvium. I cannot believe they allowed that to happen. Why didn't they get more audits? Why didn't they have more internal security checks? Why? So that is the reason for the delay. And I'm not even going to cushion it. It's just, it is what it is. And it has to be that way.
Can I just mention one other benefit that we got out of having this delay? We didn't have the ability to mint the way that we wanted to on IMX at the time. So by having that extra time, we didn't have our engineers just sitting on their butts. We made the decision while these delays were going about, which obviously were caused by the SRv2 audits. We can't get the audit for land sale done, which uses SRv2 until SRv2 is done, and also staking v2 is live and secured, which was, if anyone ever finds out how ridiculously complex it was to make sure that everyone was secured there, it'll pop your brains. Staking v2 was just mammoth, and to get through that and have it be effectively smooth sailing was a huge win for us. But by minting the land on IMX, we save everybody who buys land in the sale a significant gas fee. I've estimated it to be somewhere between $5 and $7 million worth of gas will be saved by just having the mint function not happen on layer 1, plus a couple of other little functions that optimizations that we don't have to do, because our land is actually a reasonably complex NFT. It's not as simple as just a picture. It has a lot of metadata in there that allows us to do things like expose where it exists inside of the actual Illuvium map. When you buy your land at some stage down the road, when we get to the point where you can go out to that area of the world, that metadata will tell you exactly where your land is, and you'll be able to run to it. It won't just be a random instance that you pop into and play. It'll be in physical space. So by having all of that detail there and then minting it on IMX, we effectively get a large-scale gas savings. So that means that people will effectively save a lot of money. If you were going to spend, $1,000 on a piece of land and it was going to also set you back $300 in gas fees, that would be not so great. But now the gas fees will be far more reasonable. Still, there'll be some because part of the sale is on layer 1. But remember, the overall goal is to get everything as soon as we can to layer 2 so that you guys can reap the rewards of the systems that we've set up on the back end, which are incredibly complex.
Cool. Let's open that up. Questions?
No questions. Oh,
Oh, here we go.
We won't be mean, I promise.
Hi guys, thanks for having this AMA. And I was actually just wondering if you guys are also planning to have your loggings of all this happening, what the development of this, if you would have ever make a documentary about to basically have us see how it went on down. I would be very interested in this, and thank you for all the hard work. Yeah.
No worries.
Grant is the person to speak to about that, I think.
Yeah, he's at my house at the moment, and I was just I just turned around to see if he was in the room. But yeah, he for some reason he really, really badly wants to do a Netflix documentary. To be honest, it's kind of a little bit weird. Like, you can't really do. We would almost have to. We're all remote, so you would almost have to put like a camera up in all of our offices, and then do like a mega job of editing it down to something that is digestible. But to be honest, building a AAA game, going from 0 people to 200 plus people, and like, it has not been pretty.
Okay.
You know, like, if you want to see people like going off the deep end every month and then coming back and going in again and go, like, it's savage what we're trying to achieve here. And yeah, you know who I want to see a documentary of? Aaron. I want to see his day to day, because I get the luxury of doing the external stuff and talking to VCs and partnerships and stuff like that. Aaron is literally in the nitty gritty of the building day to day across literally every single vertical in the DAO. And yeah, I don't even know. It's like he has 30 hours in the day and everyone else has 24.
Well, then I suppose that even if you want to see this documentary, it probably has a higher chance than I expected it to actually happen. At least it's maybe someone being only Aaron being patronized or being tortured by it, but we'll see.
I mean, to be honest, there's probably like 15 people that I would want to see that document. Like, I want to see Florian's documentary. I want to see how many people there are in Florian's team. And I don't mean like Florian's actual team, his UI team. I mean, how many people are in his house that he's making it out like he's only one person? Because some of the shit that he does and how much he does, it's ridiculous.
All I'll say is, please God, no. And secondly, there are at least 50 people on this project that go way harder than me and do way more useful things. You would never believe how many absolute beasts we have on this project that go beyond, right? We have people that can draw up absolutely stunning artwork in 40 minutes. We've got people that code all weekends while their wrists are nearly falling off. We've got Grant going to the point where he's nearly crippling his hands. We've got a number of people. We have one team that at the moment is literally one person, and they're covering around about 8 people's work. And it's just because of the necessity of how we have to do it. And they just go so incredibly hard. So while I appreciate being told that I do a lot, like, it's absolutely minuscule compared to the rest of the team. We have juniors on the team in some small areas that just are seniors. It's just they're 20 years old and they've somehow found a way to have the maturity of a 35-year-old, and they pump out material like you have never seen. Hundreds of VFX per day, hundreds of sound effects per day, and just always ridiculously high quality. So, I mean, I would love to see the documentary. I just don't want to be involved at all in the making of it. But
yeah, I think I've watched back like one AMA of mine in my entire existence. Looking back on yourself is kind of a little bit weird, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, Aaron is right. Like, And look, we can sit here and talk about it all we want and say that everyone's a beast and whatever, but the product shows it. Like, it actually shows it. There's absolutely no way in hell we could achieve this with the small amount of people that we have. Because you would think if you're going for like the AAA record of the century to do the fastest build of a game possible, you would take a team of 2,000 people to do it. We are only 220 or whatever, and we've grown to that. So like, when you factor all of these things in, it would be impossible to do without freakishly good people on the team. And there's just so many of them. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. We are not the skilled people.
But anyway, let's.
Thanks for the insights.
Yeah, I think
more.
we got 3 more.
We're at about an hour already too, so we can just take these last questions.
I'll just quick before we take this last question, because it kind of ties into the last question. But the reason we can't use SILV2 in for tier 5 land is Zora Auction House, which is what we're using for our contracts to run the tier 5, doesn't support SILV2. It was something that Aaron mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago, and it would have meant a massive delay on top of already being delayed. And to be honest, I don't think the plan, like from all of the parties that I've spoken to, they're preparing ETH anyway, like as in VCs. So I made the call and said, look, if the community has an issue with it when we put out the IIP, then, worst case, we can go back and change this. Like, it is upgradable. But for the sake of 2 plots that we're selling, I just honestly don't think it's worth it. Again, that's the reason that's there. So if we do want to go and change that and delay the land sale a little bit longer, we can do that. But I don't know, my take on that is that would be very silly.
Just remember as well that if we had 2 separate funds for a English style auction, right? Like, we're now using a different style of auction. It means that there's 2 separate prices, and if there becomes a discrepancy over the course of that auction between SLV2 and ETH, which absolutely can fluctuate and could be manipulated through, flash sales and stuff like that, someone could beat out someone else's offer without actually putting up more money by forcing SRV to jump up because it's tied to ILV, or by dropping it down so that their ETH bid suddenly became more valuable and stuff like that. So the amount of engineering that would be required to get around that manipulation, it's certainly not worth it for 2 plots of land.
Cool.
Do we want to go to Caveman?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, if you guys are okay with me changing the subject. I was going to add a new thing.
Yeah, we're done now in terms of our question.
Awesome. Well, first off, I want to say thanks for hosting this AMA. I think these are vital to when an IIP is dropped, so I think we should have these in the future. But my question is, can we add an official way to buy fractional shares of land? I know this can be done via DAOs, sub-DAOs, but I think it would build more trust with the community and would bring in more total revenue for Illuvium. I also want to state that I don't think this idea should be implemented if it would delay the land sale anymore, maybe for future land sales, or this would allow, small wallets a chance to own their own piece of the pie. Obviously, there are a lot of failure points with this, like who holds the NFT, who plays the game, how revenue distribution would work, and more, but I think it'd be a value added. What do y'all think?
It's possible, but I can see Johnny in this AMA right now, and I can imagine that his face is probably getting redder and redder as he's hearing that, because it's not a matter of the fractional land. That's actually fairly it's fairly trivial to do, but there is a lot of complexity associated with actually implementing that in game, right? Who owns the land? There would still need to be some way inside of IMX. We'd have to work it out with them on how something like that operates. All I could say is nothing is impossible, but for the short term, that's probably not a feasible quick fix. Let's put it that way.
And to be honest, as you said, there are plenty of platforms out there that offer this where you can fractionalize your NFTs. So I'm not sure that we would want to go and build that ourselves. I'm not sure that's the best use of our resources and time.
Imagine if you, if anyone's ever used Google Sheets where you can collaboratively edit, imagine if you had that with your piece of land and you want to place a Solon converter up in the top right quadrant and the other person
I
place it at the bottom.
No, it's
someone's getting stabbed. So
no. I mean, we would do it where there would be one person actually obviously controlling the land, and then you would have thousands of owners of that, and then they would just reap the profits would be distributed back to all of them underneath. But so it's certainly possible. But again, yeah, I think we've got enough shit to build.
Gotcha. All right.
Let's
Well,
not call it a scholarship as well. It's just partial ownership.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for your input, and thank you for everything you do.
No problems.
No worries. Thanks, man.
Caveman.
Cheers.
All right, let's bring up Godson.
Yo, mic check. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Hey, thank you guys for doing this AMA. I think it's really valuable to a lot of us. Just a really quick question. What is your experience with the people that are doing the audit? Do you feel it's more for consumer confidence because you know basically the code and everything better yourself? I think there was one president of the project named Hex, and he said he hates auditors because you have to teach them how to audit, your product. Do you feel that same way with the auditors, or is it just for consumer confidence, or what is your experience with them?
I would say that there is some element of that, but that's not the majority. Almost every audit that we've put through has found either a flaw that is quite large that needs to be fixed, or they've found multiple small things that can change readability or can change the flow to mean that there's less complexity inside of the contracts. It does take a little bit of time to get someone to understand the contracts, but part of what we did after the first staking platform is that audit came back, even though it was clean, it came back that our documentation was not good enough. So when we did staking V2, you best believe that the documentation was like, you can see from the audit, we got high, but it was, I'm not going to say excessive, but it was very, very detailed. And that meant that we didn't need to teach them the second time around how it worked. And staking V2 is just monstrous. So the fact that they didn't require us to spend, weeks learning the system is a testament to the documentation that we did. And the other benefit of doing that documentation is that we actually had almost no issues with staking V2 from the beginning. And I think that that's because when we started doing it, we documented everything out to an excruciating level of detail. So by the time we got to the end, there wasn't really anything that could surprise us. One of the other benefits that we did get out of using Samsung for the audit is that he's considered one of the best in the industry, and he actually took a couple of our blockchain engineers aside and taught them what he looks for in his audit and how to be as systematic as you possibly can, to the point where it's just not possible for there to be a flaw. And so once that was done, I remember our our lead engineer for staking V2, when we put it up for audit, I said, how is this going to go? Is there going to be a lot of issues that we have to deal with? And he said, there will be absolutely zero things wrong with this. And if you look at the report, the only things were things that we acknowledged, which aren't actually a problem inside of our system, and a couple of informational problems. And literally the only reason why they are there is because staking V2 is at the bytecode limit for what is available. So we couldn't make it any bigger than what it was, and it couldn't be any more optimized. So in the end, we basically had nothing wrong with it. That doesn't mean that some genius later on could potentially find a flaw with it, but we are far more confident with staking V2 than what we were with V1, even though staking V2 is probably on an order of magnitude more complex.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Even when I asked Kane to get his perspective on it, because I thought, after the hack, we had an auditor, how could this happen? And he basically said they're there to make your team better, right? Which is exactly what you just explained, and exactly what I think has happened. Although having said that, it's not like certainly not anytime in the near future. We're not going to go away from this new system of 2 external audits and 1 internal, where plus the additional white hat that does a review of it as well. We just can't, because again, it is going to mean that things take longer, but we're trying to, this is not a 1-year project for us. It's not a 5-year project for us. It doesn't have a roof on it. It literally doesn't. And so we need, like, our fundamental contracts that we are building now from the ground up need to be ironclad, just so robust that we know that we can continue to build and build and build and build with as little risk as possible. Like, that trade-off of time versus security, I will take every day of the week. And the reason, $500,000 just came out of my wallet. I didn't like it, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing to remember is that the game itself, being a game, like, that can be launched as a public beta with a few flaws. If there's a character that skates a little bit around the ground, or if a projectile doesn't quite hit where it was supposed to hit, none of these things are the end of the universe. So we're trying to build the game gradually. Remember, even Arena and Overworld are meant to be actively worked on for probably the next 2 to 3 years to get them up to a really, really polished state. Overworld is currently borrowing the mechanics of Arena for the combat, right? It uses an auto battler, but eventually the overworld is going to be, apart from the actual world itself, almost indistinguishable in terms of the way that it plays out. And it won't be like that at the start, but that's okay. We're able to build things up gradually. With the blockchain contracts, you don't get an option to build it up gradually. It's done correctly the first time, or you suffer the consequences.
Yep.
Well, I mean, this is a really great
Good.
turnout.
Yeah, we've already gone over an hour, so good deal.
Well, I was just going to say before we wrap up, based on the comments of everyone coming up saying, this has been really helpful and whatever, obviously the Discord has grown to an outrageous number. There are 50 times more questions that are coming through on a daily basis than there were 12 months ago. I think it would be prudent to do this style of AMA. And to be honest, it makes sense. It's almost like we parade around the Web3 world giving AMAs to everyone else, and we don't really do it internally. So I think it makes sense to do this probably fortnightly. If not both of us, definitely myself, I'll make sure that I'm available. So I
Yeah.
just think that
Mm.
that would be useful.
And with the council too, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this would be external to the council.
Yes.
This would just be a pure AMA. What are the most pressing things? Because it's really we have an awesome community, and the precedent that we've set from day one is that we are going to be open, transparent. We do things with the community in mind always, like always. And the reason is that's going to generate the most amount of revenue and give us the most amount of people playing the game, which is literally all we care about. So we're out here to look after you. And if something seems awry and like we start, as Aaron mentioned, hearing like, are they trying to jack up the prices for the land? Like that is never, ever going to be the case from any of the core contributors. So I think it's just a matter of, we're not as active in chat anymore and these things start building up and then, it just snowballs. So if we can do this every 2 weeks and any pressing questions, if you ever feel like, oh, these guys are being dodgy or whatever, I guarantee you a phone call will alleviate all of the confusion because we're genuinely not here. We're just trying to build a really, really fun game. That's it.
And it is fun.
Don't tell them that. That means that you've played it. We're not. All good. All right. Thanks so much for everyone attending. It was, I think it was a good AMA.
Thank you very much.
And thanks
guys.
for coming
thanks,
on, Aaron.
guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Have a
See
good
ya.
night, everyone, or day, whatever time zone you're in.
Bye-bye.